Sean Sullivan, congressional reporter for the Washington Post, joins me now to talk more about politics. Okay, I want to ask you, many in the GOP obviously were shocked about this deal that the president struck on funding and the debt ceiling, but why don't some Republicans like this deal? What is it in particular that they're upset about?
Well, there are a couple of different reasons why Republicans don't like this deal. When you look at Republican leaders like Mitch McConnell, Paul Ryan, they wanted a longer-term deal for a couple of reasons. One, they didn't want to give Democrats leverage again in December to perhaps bring other issues into this debate, immigration, other matters. They wanted to do a longer-term deal, something that would extend the debt ceiling and fund the government for a much longer period of time, potentially even beyond the midterm elections next year, so that they wouldn't have to worry about it. Well, now Democrats are going to be back at the negotiating table in December. They'll have a chance to gain some leverage in that debate, and that's something Republican leaders wanted to avoid. In terms of conservative lawmakers, they didn't like this deal because they said, look, we're extending the debt ceiling again, but we're not doing enough to rein in spending. There's nothing in this bill that does that. So this annoyed them. So you have Republicans across the political spectrum who were angry and I think, frankly, very, very shocked that the president decided to do this deal and essentially give Democrats exactly what they were asking for.
And Sean, it's not just it's not just Republicans who aren't happy, it's also Democrats too. Why?
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, a lot of what Democrats asked for, they basically got in this deal. But then you have some Democrats who say, well, hold on a second, we got some leverage here. We should have used this debate to get some guarantees when it comes to immigration, because, of course, the president earlier in the week announced that he was going to end DACA, which is an Obama-era program that protects certain young undocumented immigrants who were brought into the country as children. So those Democrats said, well, hold on, we should have gotten something more. We should have gotten something, some sort of guarantee to help us in those negotiations. If the president needs our help, if he's all of a sudden going to come to us for votes, we should have done something more on immigration. And I think they're a little bit frustrated that they were not able to get any sort of guarantee or concession on that front from Trump.
And the president says he wants to move forward on tax reform. How do you think this debate on cutting taxes for corporations and the wealthy, how is this going to impact the legislation and trying to push this forward when you've also dealing with the debt ceiling?
Well, it complicates things. You know, on the one hand, you've now sort of cleared up the next few weeks where you can really bear down and work on tax reform if you're the Republicans. And they're going to need to work on it a lot because there are a lot of disagreements on tax reform, not just between Republicans and Democrats, but among Republicans. There's a lot they don't agree on. But you're right, as we look to the end of this year, as we look to December, once again, we're going to start winding up that debate over the debt ceiling, over funding the government. That is going to take some of the attention, some of the bandwidth away from tax reform. And Mitch McConnell said earlier this year he's hoping at least to get tax reform done by the end of the year. It's just really, really hard to see that happening now that we have another cliff that lawmakers are going to have to scale at the end of this year.
And a 3-month extension really isn't a whole lot of time there. Meanwhile, I want to ask you about the Russian investigation. It continues to heat up. Donald Trump Jr. grilled for hours this week. We're also learning overnight that Hope Hicks, the White House communications director, has reportedly hired an attorney. The Washington Post reports that Special Counsel Robert Mueller wants to also talk to other members of the White House, former White House aides. Who exactly and why?
Well, it's a handful of them. The most notable ones are Reince Priebus, who is a former White House chief of staff, and Sean Spicer, who is a former secretary. Neither of these men seem to leave the White House on good terms. And remember, these were also individuals who worked pretty closely with Trump during the campaign. So I think Mueller might be interested in what they knew, not just in their time in the White House, but during the campaign, about any contacts with Russia, any contacts with Russian officials. And remember, he's also looking at whether there is any sort of obstruction of justice that happened here. So essentially what you're going to have happen is former White House officials, former high-ranking White House officials who didn't part with Trump on good terms, who are going to be, it looks like, interviewed in this investigation, and we'll see where that leads.
So in light of all this, how do you think this will affect the president's relationship with Congress? Is the administration in a good position to push their agenda forward?
Not really. I mean, the president does not have a good relationship with Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell right now. We saw that earlier this week. We saw how surprised they were that he sided with Democrats over them. I think there are still some hard feelings about the way the health care push ended earlier this year. They were not able to repeal and replace Obamacare the way that they had promised their base for so many years. So I think there's a lot of hard feelings, a lot of blame going around right now. A lot of Republicans say, look, if we can pull together and we can pass a tax reform bill, that will fix things. But if they can't, it looks like things only get worse from here for the Republicans.
All right. Sean Sullivan from the Washington Post. Thank you for joining us, Sean.
Thanks, Rena.